Anna thought she found love with Mark, a kind-hearted American who gave her a new start in Miami. But when her brother, Diego, arrives, a shocking betrayal unravels. Caught in a web of lies, Mark fights back, not with fists, but with truth. Will justice prevail? Subscribe and hit the bell to find out. Anna stepped off the plane in Miami, her pulse racing as she gripped a crumpled piece of paper with an address scrawled in smudged ink. At 28, she'd left Colombia with little more than a half-empty backpack and a stubborn hope to start over. The airport buzzed with voices she barely understood, her English limited to phrases practiced on a shaky bus ride months ago. She navigated the terminal with hesitant steps, piecing together directions through gestures and broken words. By dusk, she reached a cramped studio apartment in Hialeah, its single bed and chipped dresser all she could afford. It wasn't much, but it was hers, a foothold in a new world. The first week blurred by in a haze of job hunts. Anna clutched a thin resume, its edges worn from being folded and unfolded as she knocked on doors across the city. Warehouses, diners, cleaning services. Most turned her away with curt nods or skeptical glances. Her accent tripped her up, and the rejection stung, but she pressed on. On day 6, a logistics company in Doral hosted a job fair. Anna stood in line, rehearsing her pitch, her palms sweaty. That's where she met Mark. Mark, 32, was a shift supervisor at the warehouse, overseeing the loading docks with a quiet confidence. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but his steady presence drew her in. When Anna fumbled her introduction, mixing up words in a nervous rush, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, patient, and asked her to repeat herself slowly. His calm voice cut through the noise of the crowded fair, and for the first time in days, Anna felt seen. He handed her an application, explaining the job: stockroom work, sorting packages, scanning inventory. It was grueling, but it was a start. She filled out the form, her handwriting careful, and handed it back. Mark glanced at it, nodded, and said, "Come by tomorrow. We'll see what you can do." The next morning, Anna showed up early, her nerves buzzing. The warehouse was a maze of towering pallets and beeping forklifts. Mark met her at the entrance, walking her through the basics: how to use the scanner, where to stack boxes, how to read the order codes. His instructions were clear, and when she struggled with the scanner's buttons, he showed her again without a hint of frustration. During a break, he offered her half his sandwich, waving off her polite refusal. "You'll need the energy," he said, his tone light but kind. Anna took a bite, grateful, and felt a small warmth settle in her chest. Over the next few weeks, Mark became her anchor. The warehouse was relentless. Orders poured in, supervisors barked commands, and coworkers grumbled when she slowed the line. But Mark was different. He'd check in during shifts, showing her shortcuts to organize pallets faster or explaining slang she didn't catch. Off the clock, he'd linger by the break room, sharing stories about his love for old vinyl records, Springsteen, mostly, and how he'd saved up for his first car, a beat-up Chevy that still ran. Anna listened, her English improving with every conversation, and shared bits of her own life. Growing up in Medellin, helping her mom at a fruit stand, dreaming of a life beyond the city's chaos. She kept her stories vague, sidestepping details about family or her past, and Mark didn't press. He liked her quiet determination, the way she tackled each shift despite the odds. Their connection grew effortlessly. Mark started walking her to the bus stop after work, the Miami heat lingering even as the sun dipped low. One evening, he showed her how to buy a transit pass, laughing when the machine ate her coins. Anna laughed too, a rare sound that made her feel lighter. By month 3, they were spending weekends together, grabbing coffee at a Cuban cafe in Little Havana, strolling along the boardwalk, the ocean breeze carrying their easy banter. Mark felt a spark he hadn't known in years, not since his last relationship fizzled out. Anna seemed to feel it too, her guarded smiles softening when he was around. One night, over takeout tacos in his small apartment, Anna looked at him, her eyes steady. "Mark, you make this place feel safe," she said. The words hit him hard. He'd been alone for years, content but not fulfilled, and here was someone who saw him, really saw him. He took her hand, his heart pounding, and asked her to move in. She said yes without hesitation. A month later, they stood in a Miami courthouse, exchanging vows in front of a bored clerk and two strangers as witnesses. Anna's hand trembled as she signed the marriage certificate, but her smile was bright. Mark felt like he'd won something rare, a chance at a life he'd always wanted. They celebrated with burgers at a diner, laughing over greasy fries, and moved her few belongings into his place that night. But there were cracks Mark didn't see. Anna kept her phone face down, its screen lighting up with messages she'd check when he wasn't looking. She'd changed the subject when he asked about her family, saying they were distant, that she'd left Colombia to escape old ties. Her stories were consistent but sparse, like a script she'd memorized. Mark, caught up in the rush of their new life, chalked it up to her adjusting to a new country. He trusted her, believed in the quiet moments they shared, her hand brushing his as they washed dishes, the way she hummed while cooking arepas. To him, these were proof of something real. At work, Anna kept to herself, polite but distant with others. Coworkers noticed she avoided personal questions, her answers clipped. Mark brushed off their comments, thinking she was just shy. But sometimes, late at night, he'd catch her staring at her phone, her face tense, typing quickly in Spanish. When he asked who she was texting, she'd say it was a cousin checking in, then slip the phone away. Mark let it go, not wanting to seem controlling. He told himself trust was the foundation they were building, that love meant giving her space. Yet, in the back of his mind, a quiet unease began to stir, a whisper he ignored, telling himself it was nothing. Anna, for her part, seemed committed. She'd pack his lunch for early shifts, leaving sticky notes with simple messages, "Have a good day, mi amor." She'd laugh at his terrible attempts to salsa dance in the living room, teaching him steps until they were both breathless. But there were moments, fleeting, subtle, when her guard slipped. A phone call she'd take outside, speaking low. A hesitation when Mark talked about meeting her family someday. Small things, easily dismissed, but piling up like shadows in a corner. By their 6th month together, Mark was all in, dreaming of a future with Anna, a house, maybe kids, a life rooted in the city they were building together. Anna smiled at his plans, nodding, but her eyes sometimes drifted, as if she were somewhere else. Mark didn't know it yet, but the address on that crumpled piece of paper, the one that brought her to Miami, wasn't just a destination. It was the first step in a plan far bigger and far colder than he could have imagined. Mark woke to the smell of fresh coffee, Anna already in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal. It was a quiet Saturday, 6 months into their marriage, and their small Miami apartment felt like home. Anna's presence, her quick smiles, the way she hummed while cooking, had settled into his routine, grounding him. But today, her usual ease was absent. She sat across from him at the breakfast table, her fingers tapping the mug, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from it. "Mark," she said, her voice careful, "my brother Diego wants a visit. From Colombia. He's looking for a new start like I did." Mark paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. Anna had rarely mentioned family, always brushing off questions with vague comments about being estranged. He'd respected her boundaries, assuming time would open those doors. Now a brother? It caught him off guard, but he nodded, eager to support her. "That's great," he said, forcing a smile. "Family's important. When's he coming?" Anna's shoulders relaxed, and she said next week, explaining Diego was 30, tired of Medellin's grind, and needed a place to crash until he found work. Mark agreed without hesitation, picturing a chance to know Anna better through her roots. He offered to set up the couch, already mentally rearranging their cramped space. Diego arrived on a humid Friday afternoon. Anna left work early to pick him up from the airport, and Mark met them at the apartment after his shift. Diego was tall, with a sharp jaw and a handshake that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. His confidence filled the room, his eyes scanning the space as if sizing it up. Anna hovered close, her laughter louder than usual as she introduced him. "This is my big brother," she said, her hand on Diego's arm. Mark smiled, offering a beer, but Diego's curt nod and clipped thanks set an uneasy tone. At dinner, Mark tried to spark conversation, asking about Colombia, Diego's plans, the job market. Diego's answers were short, almost dismissive, and he leaned toward Anna, speaking in rapid Spanish. Mark caught fragments but couldn't follow. Anna translated lightly, saying Diego was just jet-lagged. At the warehouse, where Anna worked afternoon shifts, Diego soon landed a job in the same stockroom. Mark, as supervisor, trained him, showing him the ropes, how to log shipments, stack pallets, use the inventory system. Diego picked it up fast but kept his distance, his focus on Anna during breaks. They'd huddle together, speaking in low tones, their laughter stopping when Mark approached. Once, Mark overheard Diego say "El plan" in a hushed tone, Anna shushing him as she glanced around. Mark brushed it off as work stress, but the word lingered, sharp and heavy. Their dynamic at home grew stranger. Diego slept on the couch, his belongings spilling across the living room, but he acted like he owned the place, leaving dishes in the sink, blasting music late. Anna didn't seem to mind. Her attention split between Diego and her phone, which buzzed constantly with messages she'd answer in private. Mark noticed her checking it during dinner, her fingers flying across the screen. When he asked who she was texting, she said, "Just a friend from back home," and changed the subject. Mark let it slide, not wanting to seem paranoid, but the air felt thicker, charged with something he couldn't name. One evening, Mark came home to find Anna and Diego laughing over a shared phone screen, their heads close. They pulled apart when he entered, Anna tucking the phone away. "Old photos," she said, her smile tight. Diego smirked, saying nothing. Mark's stomach twisted, but he forced a grin, asking about their day. Their answers were vague. Work, errands, nothing specific. Later, in bed, Anna curled against him, her touch familiar, but her silence felt like a wall. Mark stared at the ceiling, replaying Diego's smirk, the way Anna's eyes darted to him during conversations. At work, the tension grew. Coworkers noticed Anna and Diego's closeness, their whispered exchanges in Spanish drawing curious glances. One colleague, Javier, pulled Mark aside during a break. "They don't act like siblings," he said bluntly. "Too comfortable." Mark laughed it off, but Javier's words stuck. He started watching them closer. During a shift, he caught Diego's hand lingering on Anna's arm as they sorted packages, her laughter too bright, too intimate. Another time, he found them in the break room, heads bent over a phone, their conversation cutting off when he entered. Anna's smile was quick, but her eyes didn't meet his. One night, Mark woke to hushed voices from the living room. He crept to the door, hearing Anna and Diego speaking in Spanish, their tones urgent. "We need to be careful," Anna whispered. Diego's reply was sharp. "He doesn't suspect anything. Stick to the plan." Mark's heart pounded, but he stayed silent, retreating to bed. The next morning, Anna acted normal, packing his lunch with a sticky note, "You're my rock." But the words fell hollow. Mark's trust, once unshakable, began to crack. He told himself it was cultural, that siblings in Colombia might be closer than he understood. But the doubt grew, fed by Diego's lingering glances, Anna's guarded phone, and the phrase, "the plan," that echoed in his mind. By week 3 of Diego's stay, Mark felt like an outsider in his own home. Anna and Diego shared inside jokes, their laughter filling the apartment when he wasn't around. Once, he returned early from store run and found them on the couch. Too close, their voices dropping as he entered. Anna said they were planning Diego's job search, but her flushed cheeks and Diego's smug grin said otherwise. Mark's patience frayed, but he held back, clinging to the life he'd built with Anna. He wanted to believe in her, in them, but the whispers principe, every look, every whisper, every touch between Anna and Diego felt like a betrayal waiting to be named. At work, Mark threw himself into his tasks, avoiding Anna's gaze. But the weight of it all pressed harder each day. He'd catch Diego watching him, a glint of amusement in his eyes, as if daring him to see the truth. Mark wasn't a fighter, but he was no fool. Something was wrong, and the truth was closing in, whether he was ready for it or not. Mark's head throbbed as he left the warehouse early, the Miami sun glaring down on him. A nagging nausea had plagued him all morning, and no amount of water or aspirin dulled it. He'd pushed through his shift, barking orders to keep the loading docks moving, but by noon his supervisor noticed his pallor and sent him home. Mark didn't text Anna, who was likely still at the apartment, preparing for her afternoon shift. His unease, fueled by weeks of doubt, gnawed at him, urging him to move quietly, to see without being seen. He boarded the bus, the ride a blur of rattling windows and distant chatter. Diego's arrival had turned Mark's life upside down. The man's smug demeanor, Anna's guarded glances, their whispered Spanish conversations. Each moment chipped away at the trust Mark had built with her. He'd overheard the plan twice now, a phrase that haunted him, but he'd convinced himself it was nothing, just family talk he didn't understand. Yet, Javier's warning at work, "They don't act like siblings," echoed louder each day. Mark gripped his keys as he approached the apartment, his chest tight with a premonition he couldn't shake. He turned the lock slowly, easing the door open to avoid its usual creak. The living room was empty, Diego's blankets strewn across the couch. Muffled voices drifted from the kitchen, low and urgent. Mark set his backpack down, his pulse quickening, and stepped toward the sound. He paused at the threshold, something stopping him from calling out. Then he saw them, Anna and Diego, pressed close in the kitchen, her hands cupping his face, their lips locked in a kiss that held no trace of sibling affection. Time froze. Mark's breath caught, his world tilting as the truth crashed into him. Anna gasped, pulling back, her eyes wide with panic. Diego turned, his expression flickering from surprise to defiance. Mark stood rooted, his voice hoarse but steady. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked, the words heavy in the silence. Anna stammered, her hands flailing as if searching for an excuse. "Mark, it's not. Let me explain," but her trembling voice betrayed her. Diego crossed his arms, a smirk curling his lips, as if daring Mark to react. The air crackled with tension, every second stretching into eternity. Mark's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Anna's locked phone, Diego's arrival, their secretive talks. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on Anna. "Your brother, huh? Tell me the truth." Now, Anna's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. She took a shaky breath and spoke, her voice flat, as if she'd rehearsed this moment. "Diego's not my brother. He's my boyfriend. From Colombia. We planned this." The words hit like a punch. She explained how they'd been together in Medellin, trapped by poverty, desperate for a way out. A cousin had suggested the scam. Marry an American, secure a green card, then bring Diego over as a relative. Mark was the means to an end, chosen for his kindness, his trust. Each sentence cut deeper, but Mark stayed calm, his anger a cold, focused thing. Diego scoffed, muttering in Spanish, but Anna pressed on, admitting they'd staged everything. The courthouse wedding, her sticky note lunches, the life they'd built. She said she'd grown to care for Mark, that it wasn't all a lie, but her words rang hollow. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her eyes on the floor. Mark laughed, a bitter sound. "Hurt me? You used me. My home. My name." He turned to Diego, who leaned against the counter, unbothered. "You think this is a game?" Mark asked, his voice low. Diego shrugged, his smirk widening. "You made it easy, man." The taunt lit a spark in Mark, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he pointed to the door. "Get your stuff. Both of you. You're out in 30 minutes. Anna protested, her voice rising, but Mark cut her off. "No more lies. Pack. Now." They scrambled, Anna grabbing clothes from drawers, Diego tossing belongings into a duffel bag. Mark stood by the door, arms crossed, watching every move. Anna's hands shook as she stuffed a backpack, her eyes darting to him, pleading. Diego, still defiant, muttered something in Spanish, but Mark's glare silenced him. When Anna tried to speak again, Mark raised a hand. "Save it. You've said enough." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact, an old friend in law enforcement. Diego's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. As they dragged their bags to the door, Anna turned, her voice soft. "Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't want this." He didn't look at her. "You want a green card. You got caught. Leave." Diego pushed past, muttering, but Mark's stare held firm. The door slammed behind them, the lock clicking with finality. Mark sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, the weight of betrayal crashing down. The life he'd built with Anna, every laugh, every shared meal, had been a lie, a calculated move in a game he didn't know he was playing. But even as the pain burned, a resolve took root. Mark wasn't a fighter, not with fists or shouting matches, but he was no victim either. He stood, his jaw set, and began rifling through drawers, collecting anything Anna had touched, papers, receipts, notes. He found her old phone charger, a forgotten USB drive, and a notebook with scrawled numbers in Spanish. Each item was a piece of the puzzle, evidence of the scam. He didn't know exactly what he'd do, but one thing was clear. Anna and Diego had underestimated him. They'd used his trust, his home, his heart. Now, they'd face the consequences of crossing a man who wouldn't break. Mark sat on the couch, the apartment silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. The door Anna and Diego had slammed shut hours ago still echoed in his mind. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of what he'd uncovered. The life he'd built with Anna, every shared laugh, every quiet moment, was a lie, a carefully scripted scam to secure her green card. Diego, her supposed brother, was her lover, and Mark had been their pawn. But the shock was giving way to clarity. He wasn't going to let their betrayal define him. He stood, pacing the small living room, his resolve hardening. Mark wasn't one for revenge, but he needed justice, not just for himself, but to reclaim the life they tried to steal. He began gathering evidence, starting with the notebook Anna had left behind. Its pages held phone numbers, dates, and phrases in Spanish like act natural and keep him happy. He found a USB drive tucked in a drawer, plugged it into his laptop, and discovered screenshots of their chats, messages planning a marriage, coaching Anna on how to play the devoted wife. One message from Diego read, "He's too nice to suspect anything." Mark's jaw clenched, but he kept going, collecting receipts from their courthouse wedding, photos from Anna's phone he'd backed up months ago, and even her fake sibling paperwork for Diego. By morning, Mark was at the USCIS office in downtown Miami, a folder of evidence under his arm. The waiting room buzzed with nervous applicants, but Mark was calm, his purpose clear. He met with an immigration officer, a no-nonsense woman who listened as he laid out the story. Meeting Anna at the job fair, their quick marriage, Diego's arrival, the overheard plan, and the kitchen betrayal. He handed over the documents, texts, photos, the notebook, each piece a nail in the coffin of their scheme. The officer took notes, her expression unreadable, and asked pointed questions. When did Anna first mention Diego? Had they filed joint taxes? Mark answered honestly, his voice steady. She thanked him, promising a follow-up, and Mark left, feeling lighter, as if he'd shed a layer of their lies. Back at the warehouse, Mark threw himself into work, his focus sharper than ever. Coworkers noticed his quiet intensity, the way he checked inventory with precision or trained new hires without his usual easy chatter. Javier, the colleague who'd warned him about Anna and Diego, clapped him on the shoulder one day. "You okay, man?" he asked. Mark nodded, managing a half-smile. Getting there. He didn't share details. His pain wasn't for public display, but his resolve earned respect. The warehouse crew started looking to him more, trusting his lead on tough shifts. Meanwhile, Anna and Diego had holed up in a cheap motel on the edge of Hialeah. Mark learned this through a coworker who'd seen Anna at a gas station, her eyes downcast, Diego trailing behind. They weren't at the warehouse anymore. Anna had stopped showing up for shifts, and Diego had never returned after their eviction. Mark didn't care where they were. He cared about what came next. A week after his USCIS visit, he got a call from the officer. They'd tracked Anna and Diego to the motel, and investigators were building a case. They needed more details, copies of their marriage certificate, and his work records. Mark sent everything, including a saved voicemail from Anna, left the night they left, begging him to talk it out. He didn't respond, but forwarded it to the officer. 10 days later, federal agents visited the motel. Anna and Diego were caught off guard, their bags half-packed, as if planning to bolt. The agents questioned them separately, and their stories unraveled. Anna claimed Diego was a cousin, then a friend, while Diego insisted he was just visiting. The evidence Mark provided, texts, fake documents, chat logs, tied them to immigration fraud. Their plan had been simple but sloppy. Marry Mark, secure Anna's status, then sponsor Diego as a sibling. But they hadn't counted on Mark's quick response or the paper trail they'd left. Both were detained, charged with fraud and misuse of legal benefits, and held pending a hearing. Mark got the news via follow-up call from USCIS. The officer's voice was professional but warm, thanking him for his cooperation. "You did the right thing," she said. "This happens more than people think." Mark hung up, staring at his phone. The pain of Anna's betrayal still lingered, but reporting her wasn't about spite. It was about accountability. He'd trusted her, given her a home, a life, and she'd used him. Now, the system would handle the rest. At work, Mark's routine became his anchor. He'd clock in early, run the loading docks with precision, and train new hires with a quiet authority. Coworkers stopped asking about Anna, sensing the topic was closed. One evening, after a long shift, Javier invited him for a beer. Mark declined, but appreciated the gesture. He wasn't ready to socialize, not yet. Instead, he started running after work, the Miami streets his escape. The rhythm of his steps, the burn in his lungs. It was his way of moving forward, of proving he was more than their pawn. As weeks passed, Mark felt the weight of betrayal lift, replaced by a quiet strength. He wasn't the naive man who'd fallen for Anna's act. He was someone who'd faced the truth, acted decisively, and taken back control. The apartment, once filled with her presence, was his again. He tossed out her leftover belongings, keeping only what he needed for closure, a single photo from their wedding day, not for sentiment, but as a reminder of what he'd overcome. Anna and Diego's fate was out of his hands now, but Mark knew one thing. He'd never let anyone play him again. Mark leaned against the warehouse railing, watching forklifts hum across the loading dock. It had been 3 months since he'd kicked Anna and Diego out, since the truth of their immigration scam shattered the life he thought they'd built. The USAS investigation had moved swiftly, and now, as Miami's morning sun burned through the haze, Mark held an official letter in his hands. It confirmed what he'd hoped. Anna and Diego had been deported to Colombia, banned permanently from re-entering the U.S. The case was closed, his citizenship secure, and the letter acknowledged him as a victim of fraud. He folded it carefully, tucking it into his pocket, and returned to work. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined him. The weeks following the confrontation had been a blur of action. After turning over evidence, texts, fake documents, and his notebook, Mark had let the authorities take over. He'd learned through a follow-up call that Anna and Diego, detained at their Hialeah motel, had crumbled under questioning. Their conflicting stories and the damning paper trail Mark provided sealed their fate. Charged with immigration fraud, they faced a hearing where their plan was laid bare. Anna's marriage to Mark was a calculated step to secure her green card, with Diego posed as her brother to follow later. The judge didn't hesitate. Deportation was ordered, effective immediately. Mark didn't gloat when he got the news. Justice wasn't about gloating, it was about moving forward. Back at the warehouse, Mark's routine became his lifeline. He clocked in early, ran the docks with precision, and mentored new hires with a quiet focus. His coworkers noticed the change. He was less chatty, more reserved, but his work ethic earned their respect. Javier, who'd first warned him about Anna and Diego, tried to bring it up once, but Mark shut it down with a nod. "It's done," he said, and Javier didn't push. The crew started turning to Mark for guidance. His calm authority, a steady presence amid the warehouse's chaos. He wasn't the guy who'd fallen for Anna's act anymore. He was the guy who'd stood up and fought back with the truth. Anna's final days in Miami were a shadow of her former self. A coworker who'd seen her at the warehouse before her resignation described her as withdrawn, slipping into HR to turn in her badge without a word. She'd avoided the stockroom, dodged old colleagues, and left with a small bag, her head low. Diego, too, had vanished from the scene, his brief stint at the warehouse forgotten. Mark heard through the grapevine they tried contacting him post-deportation, Anna sending a text claiming she never meant to hurt him. He deleted it without replying. Her apologies, like her love, were part of the act, too late, too hollow. Mark channeled his energy into rebuilding. He joined a local gym, trading late-night doubts for early morning runs along Miami's waterfront. The rhythm of his steps, the salt air in his lungs, grounded him. He started mentoring a new hire, a shy kid from Honduras who reminded him of Anna's early days, minus the lies. Teaching him the inventory system, showing him how to navigate the city, gave Mark purpose. He wasn't saving the world, but he was helping someone start fresh, the way he'd once tried to help Anna. One evening, after a long shift, Mark sat with Javier over coffee at a Cuban cafe. The conversation turned light, and Javier teased, "You got a thing for Latinas, huh?" Mark laughed, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't felt in months. "Nah," he said, stirring his cafe con leche. "I'm sticking with peace." Javier didn't catch the weight of it, but Mark did. That moment, small as it was, marked a shift. The pain of Anna's betrayal hadn't vanished, but it had faded, repositioned as a lesson rather than a wound. He transformed it into fuel, a reminder of his own strength. The apartment, once a stage for Anna's deception, felt like his again. He'd cleared out her traces, her forgotten charger, the sticky notes, the photo from their wedding day. He kept nothing, not out of bitterness, but because he didn't need reminders. His life was his own now, built on choices he controlled. He started saving for a better place, maybe a condo closer to the beach, a goal that kept him focused. At work, he took on extra shifts, earning a nod from his supervisor for a potential promotion. Mark didn't chase it for glory. He chased it for himself, for the man he was becoming. Months later, standing on the warehouse dock, Mark watched a new shipment roll in. The letter from USCIS, now filed away, was his closure. Anna and Diego were gone, their scam a footnote in his story. He wasn't the naive guy who'd trusted too easily, nor was he hardened by bitterness. He was Mark, steady, resilient, a man who'd faced betrayal and come out stronger. As he called out orders to the crew, his voice clear above the hum of machinery, he knew one thing: no one would use him again. The truth had set him free, and he was ready for whatever came next.